Egypt of the pharaohs was the greatest and the oldest and the most inventive of all the high civilizations of antiquity. And it flourished for 3,000 years. It set a pattern, an example for peoples near and far. But where were its roots, its origins, its starting point? Most of us have believed or have been taught that the glories of the pharaohs could never have been created by African people or African ideas because, it's been said, Africans could never have built a high civilization.
Here reigned for dynasty after dynasty the kings who wore the double crown, the combined crown of Upper Egypt and of the Delta. But what had they to do with Africa? How could this grand hierarchy of gods and spirits have anything in common with the superstitious mumblings of the black peoples of inner Africa? Wandering among the treasures of the Cairo Museum, it's easy to think of the Egypt of the pharaohs as a civilization complete within itself, owing little or nothing to outside influences from whatever source, entirely its own creation. And I imagine that most visitors conclude as they listen to their guides that a statue such as this of the young king Tutankhamun may have turned very black in the course of centuries, but could not have been a black man in the first place. It's a view which is now increasingly under challenge, not least from African historians and archaeologists. One of the more outspoken of these is Professor Cheikh Anta Diop of Senegal, who has made a special study of the origins of the people of ancient Egypt.
Contemporains des Égyptiens et même des philosophes du 19e siècle. Voici, dans le tombeau de Ramsès III, au XIIe siècle avant Jésus-Christ, les 4 races connues des Égyptiens représentées sur le même plan. Ici, vous avez l'Égyptien, le type générique de la race, en noir charbon, si je puis dire, avec toutes ses particularités ethniques. Et sur le même tableau, vous avez le type indo-européen représenté également, avec toutes ces différences par rapport au type égyptien, du point de vue de la couleur de la peau et du point de vue du vêtement. Et ici, vous avez les autres Africains qui habitaient à l'époque l'intérieur du continent représentés de la même façon que les Égyptiens.
That particular painting, however, is a rare exception, the only one, as far as I know, that so clearly makes the professor's point. For the most part, the ancient Egyptians had themselves portrayed as reddish pink, but of course they intermarried with Asians, and even more with other Africans. Many of their noble ladies were Nubians, and lovingly portrayed as such. This painting comes from the tomb of Hemaka, clearly a black lady, with a handmaiden behind her, just as surely white. It followed that the royal children were often black as well, as was King Senusret, seen here wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Or this pharaoh, of unknown name, but obviously of high prestige in his time, and just as clearly African. Elephantine Island in the Nile marked the border between Egypt and Nubia, and was a place of great sanctity in ancient times. Among the travelers who came here were the earliest European historians, the Greeks, men like Herodotus, brought up as he was in the classical tradition which regarded the various races of the known world as different but equal. The Greeks knew Egypt well and firmly believed that the original Egyptians were black people who had come from the south to settle the land of the Nile. But Herodotus himself got no further than this. He was prevented by the first cataract from traveling further south. And so he never saw the huge temple which Ramesses II chose to build here at Abu Simbel, further south into inner Africa than any other great monument built by the pharaohs to celebrate their power. A few years ago, with immense ingenuity, the entire structure was lifted to a new site, above the artificial lake which has drowned all the sites of the most ancient kingdoms that flourished here in Nubia, even before the first of the pharaohs. But why should he have built this great temple so far to the south? Perhaps because his queen, Nefertari, was herself a Nubian. And also because these were the people of the south, whom he wanted to impress with evidence of the prisoners he'd taken in faraway Syria and Asia Minor.
Even mighty temples like this one have to be seen against the background origins of ancient Egyptian civilization. And those origins, in the light of modern science, were above all African. No matter what ideas or customs the pharaohs may have found in the Asian lands they conquered, Egypt's beginnings were in the south, in this inner Africa, which the ancient Egyptians called the land of the gods, of the African gods whom they revered as their guardian spirits.
The time came when Egyptian conquests ended. 400 years later, it was the turn of the kings of the south of Nubia, who now marched north to subdue the power of Egypt itself.
And here is the most famous of those mighty kings of the south, recognized by the peoples of that time, the 7th century BC, as among the masters of the world. This one, as it happens, received a favorable mention in the Bible, in the Book of Kings, as the emperor of Kush and of all Egypt, whose name was Taharka.